Before we start, here are the colors that you need. Okay, so we are now on day 9 and today we're going to paint hydrangea. It can be overwhelming to paint this flower because of all the small cluster of flowers and details, so we're going to paint it loosely. So for this project, we're going to do a wet on wet technique, and first we're going to wet the entire paper. So here I'm showing you the sheen on the paper. Next, we're going to grab a blue paint and we're going to just create some markings on the wet paper. And you can see that I'm trying to also dab my brush in the tissue paper so that my brush isn't too wet. And what we want is to still see the markings on the paper even if it's a little bit blurred. Then we're going to add the stem and also the leaves while the paper is still a little bit damp. And you can also start adding some shadows, some darker greens. To make it more dramatic, I'm grabbing a little bit of water and just trying to blur out the edges of the leaves and let the green color just flow into the background. So next, we want to add another layer of color. So this is going to be a little bit darker, and you can see in the reference photo, there are shadows in some areas. And so I'm going to put a darker blue. Some parts of the flower are still wet and we want that so that the colors will blend in with each other and we won't have a harsh line. And of course, we're gonna add some splatters all over our painting just to give it some dramatic effect. We can also try to blur out some of the splatters. So here I'm just adding some more dark areas to give it more depth. Alright, let's start painting, and this is our reference photo. So what I'm doing here is I'm just drawing lightly the entire shape of the hydrangea. So I'm not going to draw all the small petals. We just want the overall shape of the flower and the stem. And you can also add some leaves. And this is just going to be our guide. Next, we are going to wet our paper. So I have here just a big brush. It's a filbert brush, but you can use your round brush or any big brush. And I'm just going to paint the paper with just clean water. So I'm going to do it up and down, but to be honest, even if I do this in different directions, it's fine. So I'm so sorry if you can hear my voice. It sounds nasal because I'm still recovering from a flu as I'm recording this. Alright, so I'm going to tilt my paper so you can see the sheen on the paper. You can see that it's damp, but it's not dripping wet. And that's what we want for this project. So just want that sheen on the paper. You don't have any puddles. Hydrangeas come in different colors, but I just decided on a blue one because I think it looks very cool in the eyes. So here I'm just grabbing some colors that I will be using, and we'll need cerulean blue, Prussian blue, and also verditer blue. You can definitely switch up the colors depending on the availability of the blue colors in your palette. I'm going to start with cerulean blue. I'm using a size 6 round brush. So the paper is still damp, and I'm just going to dab my brush to create some markings, and you can see that it's spreading too much, so I'm going to dab it in a tissue paper. And now you can see that my strokes are a little bit better and you can see the markings better. Okay, so let's try it again. This is verditer blue. Alright, so you can see that almost like crescent moon shape. So that's what we want. And I'm leaving spaces in between my strokes, and you can still see the first few strokes that I did. It looks like a blob of paint, and that's because my brush is too wet. So when you're doing this project, make sure that your brush is a little bit dry by dabbing it in a tissue paper. Alright, so we're not going to be strict with this. We can mix the blues in our palette, use different blues in different areas. So just dab your brush and you'll be able to create soft strokes because this is a damp paper. You can also try adding a darker color. This is Prussian blue. I'm adding it towards the bottom part of the hydrangea just because there's more shadow in that area. So what I love about working on wet paper is that it really produces a very soft painting. Okay, so for the edges of the hydrangea, I want it to be really soft. So I'm just grabbing some water and I'm just going to quickly blur out the edges. You can see I'm trying to press my brush onto the paper and add some water just to disperse the color because I want it to be very soft. So because we've been working on this for a while, the bottom part is already dry. And I'm gonna grab some water again and just lightly wet my paper. As you can see, it's not a puddle, just really light layer of water. Now let's prepare our greens. I'm going to mix sap green and burnt umber. And we're going to add the stem. This is a thick mixture, and I'm also dabbing my brush in the tissue paper so that it's not gonna spread all over the place. Then we're gonna add the leaves. So you can see that hydrangeas have really wide leaves. Okay, I'm gonna add it towards the other side. I'm going to try and attach this to the flower. So you will see a beautiful blend of blue and green. And because we're working on a damp paper, you can see the edges of the leaves. It's kind of feathering. It looks a little bit blurred. Okay, so now you can grab a darker mixture and add it towards certain areas near the flower where the shadow will be. And then we're going to add a dramatic effect. So I just grab some water and I'm going to just lightly drag the color. So you can see right here, just grabbing water and adding it towards the bottom part of the we again just want to drag the color down, kind of let the colors flow, and it's just gonna create a beautiful background. Okay, it's time to add the second layer of the hydrangea. It's going to give it more depth. So this flower is still slightly damp. Some areas are actually dry already. And I'm just going to dab my brush to create some petal-like strokes. You can see I'm moving it up and down. So I'm using cerulean blue and also verditer blue. You can see that some areas I'm going to paint some 4 petal flowers. Maybe some will be just 3. But I'm also making sure that I have spaces in between these flowers and that you can still see some white from the base layer that we did. So we are not going to cover the entire first layer. So we still want to see that. And it can be quite tricky at first, but don't worry, this is something that you can practice. So now you can see that this hydrangea is slowly coming together. There are more details and I think it has more depth now. But of course, we're gonna add some more darker color. So this is Prussian blue. So I'm mixing a slightly darker color and I'm adding these strokes, these check mark strokes towards the bottom part. So you can always go back to your reference photo to check where the shadows are gonna be. You can also improvise. You can change the placement a little bit. Okay, so I'm just adding some really dark mixture onto the flower. Sometimes I just dab my brush like this and put some small dots. And you can rinse your brush and add some verditer blue. I guess sometimes it's all about knowing when to stop when you're doing this technique because if you add too many petals, it's going to look very crowded and it won't look soft anymore. Right, let me just add some greens here and there because in the reference photo I can see a little bit of the stems. Alright, so now we're going to add some water towards the upper part of this hydrangea. And I wanted to add some more drama to that area. So we're gonna add some blue, sort of extend some petals. So you can see that it looks very, very soft because we're painting on wet paper. If it's too much, you can always dab it with tissue paper like what I did, and then just go back in to add some strokes. So just use the tip of your brush and kind of wiggle your brush to create these markings. So right here on the side, I'm just going to blur out this part just to make it look softer. Alright, and just to give it even more depth, I'm grabbing indigo. I'm going to put small dots all over this hydrangea. So it's going to look like the center of the flower. But again, we have to be careful and not add too much so that it doesn't look too crowded. Just going to add some darker areas towards the stem and also the leaves. So the leaves here are already dry, and what we can do is we can add some texture. So you can see I'm using just the side and the tip of the brush to create these strokes. I'm trying to wiggle my brush so that it will look more organic. This is another option. Instead of painting the usual veins, you can do this technique. Right, let's add another leaf right here. I'm just using water, and then we're gonna add a little bit of that green, and then grab a darker color. And I'm just gonna dab that dark color in different areas and just leave it as is. I'm not gonna blend it. And then next we can add some splatters. So when you're doing splatters and you don't know what color to use, my tip is to use the color of the flower that you did in your painting, or maybe add a little bit of green from the leaves. So I love adding splatters because it just feels like the painting looks more loosely painted. Now you can always go back in, blur out some edges to make it look softer. For some finishing touches, I'm just going to put some small dots again of indigo in different areas just to let your brain think that there are more flowers in that area. Alright, so that's it. I hope that you enjoyed painting this freestyle hydrangea.